positive side for Modi, no one ever said, and I found this shocking, no one ever said, we support India because they're a fellow democracy with a strong human rights record. What they said was, well, despite what we hear about India's human rights record, it's an important partner, by which they mean an important customer. And it's just that simple in US politics. There are very powerful groups in America who want to sell things, primarily defense equipment, to India. And so they advocate for India. I, as a social scientist, just find that shocking because I've gone through the data on India's human rights record, and it's very solid. I mean, there's just nothing to the anti-India human rights claims, but they've been repeated and repeated and washed so many times that they've simply entered everybody's consciousness.
A thought just occurred to me, and that is if America manages to sell the JSF to India, will that then put constraints upon its tolerance with regard to India's relations with Russia? Do you think there's a quid pro quo here? Yeah, look, India, you can buy my JSF, and that's all very good and fine. Oh, but by the way, now that you're in the American supply chain, that sort of thing that you're doing with Russia and the shadow fleets, I'm not so pleased with that. Can we do something to ameliorate your pro-Russian leaning? Do you think that buying the JSF could also be a trap for India where it then has to toe an American line, or
Yeah.
else spare parts maintenance for the
Yeah.
JSF disappears? It just disappears.
Look, I don't think it's going to happen, and for precisely those reasons, that the pressure can be exerted once India joins the program. That said, the F-35 is increasingly yesterday's fighter. New concepts are being developed. With by the time India were to buy it, it would probably no longer be the frontline American fighter. Both the F-22 and the F-35 are likely to be replaced sometime in the 2030s. And if the F-35 ever entered India's service, it would be in the 2030s. I mean, there's no chance of it happening in the 2020s. So maybe it won't be that important by then. Maybe Russia won't even be an enemy by then. I mean, we just don't, we're looking pretty far out into the future. Just remember that the F-35 is emblematic, but the defense procurement relationship between the US and India goes much deeper than that. And there's a whole list of things that American contractors would like to sell to India. The big one right now that's being discussed is howitzers. And howitzers are not something that most of us have ever heard of, never mind think about. But of course, the Indian Army is procuring howitzers, and they have a contract, right? And these contracts, the U.S. is, as the world's largest defense exporter, the U.S. is not all about just one plane, right? It's about a whole panoply of companies and equipment that want to sell into again, I want to emphasize, the world's largest defense importer. I mean, India is the country that buys the most. They're usually neck and neck with Saudi Arabia for being the world's biggest defense importers.
Yeah, but unlike Saudi Arabia, India still is considering itself a strategically autonomous player in the international community. And so both of those things tend to be rubbing up against each other. Whether or not you'll have a smoother entrance of India and a much more mature situation between New Delhi on the one side and Washington on the other, that's for time to tell. But at the moment, it just doesn't seem like a really good fit right now.
Probably not. And look, the fact is, India is a poor country, and
Yeah,
the
that's right.
Rafale, the French fighter that they buy, is probably more than good
Affordable,
enough. Probably
right?
beats anything that the Chinese can put in the air in numbers. I know the Chinese have some extraordinary technology where they have one or two examples, but they haven't industrialized these technologies. And if India can fly a Rafale fighter and have the S-400 systems and can continue to and buy Israeli technology because they put Israeli technology in the nose cones of those Rafales, they can probably keep ahead of China and Pakistan, and that's all they really need to do. And remember, India is not seeking air dominance halfway around the world. They're not going to. The United States can bomb Iran from 12,000 miles away. India is not going to bomb Paraguay, right? It really has very limited defense interests. That is preventing a Pakistani or a Chinese invasion, launching these short-range retribution strikes if Pakistan has any terrorist activity in India, as happened last month, and maintaining security on its border with Myanmar and Bangladesh. These are, for the most part, not anywhere as demanding as what the US and NATO seek to do.
You're listening to the Focus Podcast. I'm your host, John Bruni. If you're finding these deeper global conversations useful, please support us by subscribing on your favorite platform and sharing this episode. You can also catch up on previous episodes at sageinternational.com.au by clicking on the Media Center drop-down menu and clicking either video or podcasts. Now back to the conversation with Professor Salvatore Babones. Salvatore, you did make mention about China and Pakistan, and of course they had that recent clash in early May of this year. The Rafale did not turn out to be the weapon the Indians were looking for, apparently, because the Pakistanis fielded China's J-10Cs, not their top line models, and yet it seemed to have outperformed the Rafales. Do you think that this may have changed the balance of power in favor of China and Pakistan, at least temporarily?
So first, I should emphasize that I'm not a military aviation expert. All I know is what I read about these, and I've heard conflicting accounts. And modern air warfare is much more about action, over the horizon action at a distance, than about dogfights or anything like that. So what happened and what missile technology side had, honestly, I really have no broader expertise on that. What I can say is it's clear that India met its strategic objectives with relatively minor losses on its side. It struck deep within Pakistan at either terrorist camps or facilities that were used to support terrorism. The US and most Western observers seem to broadly agree that these were terrorism-related facilities, not just quote-unquote innocent, Pakistani army facilities. And it struck them with very little losses of its own on its own side. Now, the fact that a country loses one or two or however many aircraft in a war, the goal is to meet their strategic objectives. And India seems to be, certainly Indians are very happy and feel that they have met their strategic objectives. Beyond that, I can't really second guess how many fighters they may have lost and whether it was worth the loss, whether they were put in danger. I mean, I'll just change the subject a little. I know there's been a lot of debate all over the military blogosphere about the future of the tank and how many tanks have been destroyed in Ukraine. And people forget, well, the whole purpose of a tank is to go into danger